Hey, it's Jessie from Squeegee Ink and welcome back to Printer's Corner. This is where I take some of your questions that you've given me around social media, all about garment decoration, and I answer them like this. We have 3 questions for you this week. They're mainly about wash tests, whether you can recure ink, and whether the stretch test is actually the best method to test plastisol ink. Make sure to stick around to the end of the episode to see the results from this week's community poll. The first question is from Blue Colour Girl, and they said, "Thanks for the tips. If the stretch test fails, can I try and recure them? #Printers Corner." I would say yes. You might not be able to repair the stretched, cracked item, but you should be able to save the ones you haven't stretched. So if you don't know, the stretch test is where you basically have some plastisol ink printed on a garment and you just lightly flex it, and it just proves that the plastisol is like flexible, and it's a good indicator to see whether you've got that plastisol up to a high enough temperature so that it's wash safe. If the issue is just that you haven't put them in the conveyor dryer for long enough, then passing them through again at the correct temperature, which is normally about 165 degrees for around about a minute, I think it would save the print run, because you're basically just adhering to the instructions on the back of the ink tub. And say if the first time you pass them through a bit quick, it didn't become flexible and then you've not done it well enough, I don't see why passing them through, once the shirts are fully cooled down, you don't want to put them through once, have them hot, and then put them through, because then they'll get even hotter. So let them fully cool down and maybe have another go at doing it. However, if what you've done is when you're printing, you've overheated your underbase and now the top layer of ink is flaking off, then that's not something you can really fix through putting through the dryer again. Those shirts are probably unsalvageable, I'm afraid. As a last resort attempt, you could try using a heat press on a cracked design, but understand that you're basically remelting the ink, and you might make the surface of the ink really shiny and smooth, and it might then look a bit like a transfer. So it's kind of you might be able to salvage it by doing it properly again. But anything that you've already pulled and cracked and seen those results, I think those are a write-off. The second question is from Eric Wheely 4757, and they said, #Printers Corner. I'm following in your footsteps and making my own t-shirt brand on the side of my print studio, but I can't put my shirts in the dryer as I print. If I'm using water-based inks, can I put them through the dryer the next day? Any help would go a long way. Thanks. Yeah, I can't see why not. For normal water-based inks, the curing process comes in 2 steps. The first is allowing the moisture from the ink to evaporate, and then secondly, heating the binders so that the ink allows the pigment to adhere to the fabric. So it's like, get rid of the moisture, then heat it up. The optimal way of achieving a good water-based ink cure is through a forced air tunnel dryer. That's because it dries out the moisture of the fabric and then heats it up to the correct temperature. If you can't put your prints through the dryer straight away, there is actually something else you could think of, which is putting a chemical in your ink called a cold cure additive. And it's basically a catalyst which does that kind of binding of the pigments to the fabrics for you. So that could be a really good method. And then you could basically have them stacked all around the studio. And if you wanted to kind of, ease your mind a little bit, the next day, then you could put them through the dryer and make sure, just as like a double step, to really ensure that your fabric and your prints are as wash safe as physically possible. But yeah, otherwise, I don't see why you can't let the moisture evaporate overnight and then put them all through the dryer at the correct temperature the next day, if that's the situation you're in at the moment. Our final question is from The Last Drop, and they said, #Printers Corner, when to wash test. Can I wash it straight after the print run, or will it be different later on? Thanks for your downloads about screen coating. Now on to curing. This is a great question. If you're printing with plastisol ink, you should be allowing the ink to fully cool down before doing a wash test. I've seen on suppliers' sites that you should leave the ink up to 24 hours before doing the wash. Then you make sure that the garment is properly cured. It needs to go through 3 wash cycles. I understand this isn't really feasible when you're running a studio and doing customer jobs though. So what I do in my own studio is I just trust my dryer and timings that I've figured out over the years and only really do a wash test 3 times when I'm changing something. So whether I'm changing the inks, printing on an unusual fabric, or there has been a time when in the studio it's been exceptionally hot. Another time I would do 3 wash tests would be if I was really scared about the job and it was like a really, really large job and I had to be 100% sure they're all perfect. So yeah, that's my advice. You should be waiting a day, and especially if you're just figuring out all your processes, wait that day, do 3 wash tests, and then if it's still perfect after 3, then all your settings are good to go and you should be able to replicate that as you go along. It's now time to see the results from this week's community poll.
Community poll.
The question this week was, how do you make sure your plastisol ink is cured? And the options were stretch test, crock test, 1 wash test, multiple wash tests, or I know it'll be fine. We had 77% say the stretch test was the best way. So yes, the stretch test does help you see if the ink is flexible, but you can't tell a customer, say if the ink washed off their shirt, you did a stretch test, so it's all good. You really do need to know in yourself that your garments can actually go through multiple wash cycles. So you're really confident in what you're giving your customer. And there was one comment on there which I thought was really good and sums it up really well. And that was from the only dub ace 8279, was right when they said that they stretch and wash. The main question for this episode was, can you re-cure plastisol ink after a stretch test has failed when printing t-shirts? And my answer is that if you didn't cure the shirts the first time, it's very likely that putting them through the dryer at the correct speed and heat for the second time will allow them to cure this time around and might save the print run. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel, and if you hit the bell, you'll be notified of next week's episode. And don't forget to use hashtag Printers Corner if you'd like to ask us a question, and make sure to vote in our poll you can find on the community tab of our YouTube channel.